Now, back to more Live from Seattle with Michelle Mendoza.
Glad you can join us. Today is Thursday, and you know what that means. It's News and Views Thursday.
Live from Seattle's News and Views Thursday.
Well, today, because we are so close to the election, the big election, 3 months, 10 days, 8 hours, and 38 minutes from now, that will be the start of Election Day. And there has been a lot of drama in the DNC and the RNC and in the election in general. But while everyone is talking about the election, there are stories beyond the election that you need to know about. And we're taking it on here. One story has to do with this month's ruling from the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They affirmed a previous ruling that the voter ID law that was coming out of Texas doesn't comply with the Voting Rights Act. It's a voter ID law, and we've heard a lot about this, where when you go to vote, prove to me that you're this person. Prove to me that you're a citizen. And they said, nah, it's not. It doesn't really comply with the Voting Rights Act. And what it entails is a photo ID that you would give at the polls, something like showing a driver's license from the state, an ID card, a concealed handgun license, military ID card, passport, that kind of thing. Does this make it easier for non-citizens to vote, or is that just hyperbole? I've invited our favorite lawyer. He just is. He's a scholar, a constitutional scholar, and, of course, our favorite lawyer, Byron Henry. Thanks for joining us again, Byron.
Great to be with you, Michelle.
Well, while the whole world doesn't really like lawyers in general, it's really nice to be loved here, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
So this ruling is fascinating right before, as I said, 3 months and so many days and hours till the presidential election. How significant is this?
Well, the media hype and the headlines probably overstate the decision's actual importance. While it made for good headlines, the court's actual ruling was much narrower than what would you see a headline saying Fifth Circuit strikes down Texas's voter ID law, and you're like, oh, that's a big deal. But in fact, what the court actually did was rule that for those very small number of people, a small percentage of people that don't have state-issued approved photo IDs. And there's a list of things you can use, from a concealed handgun permit to an election identification card, which the state of Texas provides free. And there's like 7 different state-issued IDs with your photo on it you can use. For those people that don't have those, what the state had said was, well, you have to get one, and we'll make it as easy as possible, but you still have to get one. And what the Fifth Circuit held was, for those small percentage of people, which was basically less than 10% of the voting public in the state of Texas, they have to have a way to vote if they can't get one. And if they can't get one, they have to sign an affidavit saying, I don't have one, for instance, and I couldn't get one because of this impediment. So for those people, they have an out. They can vote without an ID, but the court left the law in place for over 90% of voting age public in the state of Texas that do have access or actually have a photo identification to present at the polls. So there is a narrow group that will have an out to sign an affidavit, but those requirements are being negotiated now, but they will not be easy to overcome. It will require a sworn statement that you don't have a photo ID, and you still have to present some form of identification. So you have to use an electric bill or an old voter registration card or something to prove who you are, and then sign an affidavit explaining why you don't have a voter ID card. So that's the effect of the ruling.
And this is, of course, dealing with Texas, but there are rules, differing rules for each state. And some states don't make it so difficult to actually show up and prove who you are.
Well, that was one of the knocks on the Texas law, and we don't have to go into all of the details because, for instance, opponents of Texas law alleged that it was too costly or time-consuming to obtain a voter ID card, even though Texas made these election identification cards, or called EIC cards, free. They said, well, we still have to go get a birth certificate to get one. So Texas actually made the birth certificate free, by the way. And they said your birth certificate's free for purposes of getting an EIC card. But you're correct. In some states, they have a little bit more lenient requirements with respect to who has to have a voter ID, how you can vote without one, and some of them even have a longer list of photo IDs that will qualify. For instance, in some states, a college ID card can be used, where in Texas, because it's not issued by the actual state of Texas, that couldn't be used. So one thing we know is that voter identification laws are generally valid, but you have to be careful how short the list of IDs you can use. States can get in trouble for the list being too short. They can also get in trouble if there's not some basically relief or safety valve, so to speak, for those who for some reason don't have or can't obtain a photo ID. So there has to be a narrow out for those people, and that's what the courts are really looking at now, not whether photo IDs are legal or constitutional, but whether or not how many do you allow and how hard is it to get them in your state.
Okay. If you are just joining us, one of our favorite people and our favorite lawyer, of course, Byron Henry. He's a constitutional scholar, and we're taking on the issue of going beyond just the election to what are they doing to get votes and to prohibit votes? What's really going on in the background? You are always welcome to join us, 800-955-8200, like our friend Diane in Birch Bay. Hey, Di, how you doing?
Awesome. Such a beautiful day, but my question is, and concern always, is I'd like to know how secure is our integrity with the voting itself, like with the votes. Sometimes you hear of all these stories about votes being thrown away, or one concern I always have is when you mark your envelope, what party you're voting for, and I don't know the other side of it, where they're going and how they're
Isn't that interesting? I mean, when you think about it, we shouldn't have to worry about that. But in this day and age, we've all become such skeptics, and we hear some of these stories, and you wonder, if I put the wrong letter, R or D, will someone who doesn't like that just say, accidentally not include it? What are your thoughts, Byron?
Well, first of all, after the debacle that we all remember, or some of us at least remember, of the 2000 election, the Congress passed a law which basically required states to make certain changes and updates to their voting registration requirements, as well as the way votes are actually cast. Now, there were some grandfather provisions and there were some exceptions, but in a lot of states, what you have, like in most of the counties in North Texas where I live, most of the voting is electronic. So you they give you a little chip card, you plug it in the machine, you vote on a touch screen, you pull out the card, you hit the button, it records your vote, and then you're done. No one knows how you vote. There's no envelope. There's no pieces of paper, and it's all calculated electronically. Those are generally, I think, the most secure form from the kind of tampering that you would think where people just...
Well, you would hope, but we're in the middle of an election where we're still talking about emails, and electronically having our emails delivered to the Russians or held in a bathroom somewhere in a not so secured server. And so, I'm kind of with Di. That kind of scares me. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, basically, you don't have to concern yourself with the old-fashioned type of election tampering where people just walk off with ballots, or they...
You have to make them work harder.
That's right. But the real question here is, we just had just to give you an example, we just had a criminal investigation opened in the state of Texas for a race in which there were over 1,700 more votes cast than there are registered voters in the county. Now, you say, well, is that really a big deal? Well, it is a big deal because the election for that House district came down to 222 votes.
Oops.
So in that case, you could actually have it could actually make a difference in the result of an election, which we all learned from Florida. Even on a national election, you can have an election determined by a very small number of votes. So all of these laws are growing pains by which we are trying to make sure that if we're going to have elections and elections are going to matter and have important consequences attached to them, that we can all be sure that it's as secure as we can get it.
Indeed.
One of the interesting things the Fifth Circuit said in the majority, even though they did hold part of the law unconstitutional for violating the Voting Rights Act with respect to these people that couldn't get IDs, they said that there are actual studies that say that voter IDs actually increase voter participation because voters are more voters are more assured of the integrity of their ballot, and they're more likely to vote if they think their vote matters.
That's incredible. That really is an interesting statistic when you think about how we've been a bit jaded for good reason. We're skeptical for good reason. Our trust in government is at an all-time low. So when we know it's secure, we have more of a feeling of, okay, maybe my vote really will count. And that's important. And so is this issue as well, because there has been a movement of many people that say, well, undocumented people are part of our society too. They should have a voice. And people are saying, well, wait a minute. It's a very difficult issue. Let me ask you one quick question in our final few seconds together. One of the issues that it comes down to for people voting in this next presidential election is the Supreme Court issue. What are some of the big issues that the Supreme Court is going to be facing in the near and maybe not so near future that we really need to keep in mind?
Well, I think mostly your listeners are probably familiar with the biggest issues, but I mean the issues that have divided this court along what's considered ideological grounds and are basically 5-4 issues, we call them, and there are only 8 justices now, so I guess there'd be 4 issues right now, are affirmative action decided by one vote, the most recent important opinions on gun rights, which were basically 5-4 on one vote. All of the abortion decisions, by the way, even though the court only takes it up once every so often to enter the abortion fray, certainly abortion cases divide the court on ideological lines. So you could honestly say that the next president will control the court on these social issues and constitutional issues and separation of powers issues, such as the 4-4 immigration decision on President Obama's executive action on immigration. Will be decided by the next president, and they will have control of the court probably for the next 30 years based on the age of the justices and the number of important. So when you talk about Second Amendment and those things, you are talking about, in my lifetime, the most important election with respect to the courts that has come around since I've been voting.
Yeah, and I know every year we say that this is the most important election, but indeed, when you think of the importance of what this next president will do in the appointing of the next Supreme Court justice and framing what it's going to be looking like in the next 30 years, you got to really think about who you're going to be putting the check mark next to, whether it's electronically or old-fashioned way, either way. Byron Henry is a constitutional scholar and our favorite lawyer here live from Seattle. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Michelle.